This is the start of some corrosion protection and treatment work at Redish Motorsport. This one's going to be a little bit different because it's a BMW E92 M3, a 2011 mineral white with 100,000 miles on it. Customer's owned it since new, so he's done all this driving himself and plans to keep it for a long time yet. So it's just about preventive work really, just taking time to find these surface corrosion areas that he's seen whilst working under the car. It's already got some nice components on there, nitron shocks, aluminium subframe bushings, AP brakes, things like that. So we've taken off the exhaust system, disconnected the prop shaft, heat shields, rear axle has come out on our new jig that we've built for these cars, and now we are assessing the underside. We're going to be taking some more components off, more plastics, and then carrying out a degreasing process to find out where the surface corrosion is. But I'd imagine it's areas like this, up on the chassis leg at the left rear where the exhaust hanger is, little bits of corrosion on the side there and up here. These are only surface corrosion. We will say that myself and all of us here and the owner know that this is just very light surface corrosion, and it's certainly nothing terrible, but it's about getting this done whilst the car is early in these stages so that you don't get very severe and cause problems in later life. Up at the very back of the chassis leg up here, near close to the rear axle, the rear panel, and then also on the aperture, the boot floor where the battery box sits. Well, not the battery box, but the box itself. Lots of corrosion around the edge of that lip. And again, quite a bit on the other side as well, going towards the right hand side. Battery box area looks relatively good. Another little bit of corrosion here up on the exhaust hanger mount. Then the rest of the car underneath that, the rear axle carrier panel, doesn't look too bad at all. A couple of little studs that have got some corrosion on them. Just here. The battery cable holder is a little bit corroded. A couple of spot welds which are just getting some corrosion on them from some flex. There's one there, it's just starting to corrode. Another one there. Possibly a bit of corrosion up there in the top. Yeah, not bad at all, very good actually. So a really nice privilege to work on a car this clean and tidy anyway. So the next stage will be degreasing, taking off some more plastics and working out the areas we're going to be treating. So degreasing process first, we're using Pore 15 Marine Clean, which is a brilliant degreaser, and just using a scrubbing brush to agitate all the dirt. We've got some warm water on it as well, mixed in with the Pore 15, and just getting all this loose dirt off, and then we'll go through with a second pass and wipe all this off next. We've taken everything off that we want to, so we've got great access to the underside of this E92 M3 now. So that's the central under trays just here, the rear side skirt protectors. We may need to take the side skirts off shortly because we've got some corrosion on the very lower rear seals there, or the side of that, shortly later on. We're leaving the prop shaft in and the handbrake cables there. We can work around them. There's plenty of room to access the underside. So the rear boot floor plastic tray is removed, the brake pipes along with the fuel vent hose, and also the battery cable that comes down from the battery box. That's all taken out, and we've done a full degrease as well. So at the moment everything looks really good from this distance, nice and fresh, very original. I think you'd all be in agreement that you'd be happy if that was your car, because it is a very clean car. It's 2011 E92 M3, and originally when we took just the axle out, if you asked me how much corrosion work we'd be dealing with, I would have said just the rear exhaust hangers there, a little bit around the boot floor section, a bit on that battery stud just up there, and I think there was a couple of other little minor places near the front subframe mounting points. But actually when you get close and have done the degreasing process, when you've got a nice light working area and a bounce back of light, you can see an amazing amount of surface corrosion in the reflection. So obviously corrosion is brown, rust is sort of a browny colour, and you can see that when it's most violent, like here. But where it hasn't actually broke through the surface yet, look at the right rear chassis leg, this is pitted with surface corrosion. All these little raised sections are corrosion. When you actually try and scrape through that, you then get the rust colour coming through. It's just that they're in their early stages. They haven't actually broken through the electrophoretic coating at the moment. They're actually underneath the coating. So even on the battery box here, for instance, that's surface corrosion there. Tiny small amounts. And then when you actually take into consideration how much you've got to look through, and also underneath or near seam sealer joints, this will be quite a time-consuming process. On the edges of small panels like this brake pipe bracket as well, we have corrosion just starting on the very right edge there. This is underneath the left front subframe mounting point. Again, from a distance, it looks great, no real corrosion, but when you go close and shine a torch underneath, all these what look like spots or pimples, that is corrosion. So if we were to scratch that off, which see if I can do that now, whilst I'm talking on the phone, video. So the spot welds are the most corroded item there, so they show corrosion quite quickly. But you've got like a white powder underneath here, and all these bits of corrosion are trapped underneath the electrophoretic coating, which is basically a dip which BMW put the body shells in. So there's no other protection at all on the underside of the car in that location. Anything that you see is this grey, green, olive, almost light bluey tinge colour. That is just the bare minimum. That's just where the car and the chassis got dipped at factory, and it's an electrophoretic coating. The other areas of protection are here, which are the seam sealers. So you've always got about a 1-inch bead of seam sealer over a panel joint to make sure there's no spot welds visible, and that no water is going to penetrate between two layers of panel. So this overlaps this one on the seat panel, for instance, and then the rear axle carrier panel overlaps the seat panel. So all the joints need to be seam sealed, which is what this 1-inch section is. You do get a general spray in when there's an area which isn't covered by an under tray, for instance, or the wheel arch liner. So the wheel arch liner has a big cutout here which isn't covered at all, so that area gets a decent amount. It's not very thick, but it gets some seam sealer, so that the chance of stone chips are less or reduced in areas that are totally bare. And up on the wheel arch area, the very outer edge isn't protected by a wheel arch liner. It stops sort of, well, about 1 inch away where that stud lies. So there's a section of sprayable seam sealer there. And the rest of the area is just open to all the atmosphere. I can't really answer exactly what brings this corrosion on. I mean, some of that you could argue, because it's spot weld and it's next to a subframe mount point, it might be flex. But there is corrosion in random areas, which you get on nearly all cars, I suppose. But like here, for instance, let me just grab the torch. So this area here, which doesn't see any flex, so there's a couple of spot welds there that have already lost the paint off them, so that is obviously flex, so two panels are spot welded together. But there's areas here, like you could argue that flexed because that corroded because of flex, but there's no great track proving that bit of corrosion up there, just picking for example, came from there or near that stud where something's been wound on. So all these little bits here dotted over this panel are corrosion underneath the panel. So there's no great answer to why that is, unless it was just poor preparation years ago, but it's done really well because it's, what is it? Actually, it's only 7 years old. So E92s in general came out in 07, so the oldest one now is 11 years old, but this one's only 7 years old because it's 2011 and we're in 2018 now. But needs to be attended to. It's not a necessity, but this customer wanted it dealt with. He's been under here seeing various amounts of little bits of corrosion whilst doing work on his car, and just thinks it's time to get something sorted with it, just so it doesn't get any worse and it can be saved and used and loved for years to come. So that's a push rod threaded mount there. Some of that is corrosion, some of it is ingrained dirt. Also, the very bottom of the seal, offside rear seal by the jacking point at the back, we've got some corrosion there, and on the lip just here. So there's absolutely no seam sealer at all there protecting it. A little bit on this side up here, but on the inside where the fuel tank lives up here, you've got a sealed joint, but you've got no sprayable seam sealer. Like the underside of the floors, they've got a decent bit of coating. So Then we've also got corrosion in the right rear inner wheel arch. This is where the fuel tank vent hose lies, or the overflow vent, which goes up towards the filler neck. So this is getting a bit common because we've had people already email us about this. They've seen corrosion when they've had the wheel arch liners out to clean the inside, and they want to know if we can do anything or if there is anything that can be done. So it's a spot welded tube which just goes, I'll shine some light in there, so you can get through. It's quite a straight tube, and I think it's got 1 or 2 spot welds underneath the seam sealer up here and possibly down there. From our research, you can't buy that tube separately. It only comes on the inner rear wheel arch, which is roughly about £500. So that needs to be reworked in situ, because nobody's really going to want to put £500 into an arch just to get that little piece there. So that will need some work. And all these little very, very small bits are corrosion. And if our plan is to protect this for years to come and apply a sprayable seam sealer, which is looking like we're going to have to, looks like we're going to have to do a complete paint on the underside of the car, because sorry, we've got a focus issue there, because obviously it's more work than when we initially looked, when we took the axle out and we just found localized corrosion. If we are going to paint a sprayable seam sealer all over the underside of the car once we've done our corrosion protection work, then we're going to want to take off as much of these little specks of corrosion as possible, because otherwise we're just sealing it in and they're only going to carry on growing, probably at a lot slower rate because there's no real atmosphere getting to them. But it would be sensible to attend to most of these as much as possible whilst we've got great access. And some of this corrosion is also getting close to entering the boot area. These are the studs that hold the plastic boot floor container in. So we've just got some cardboard there to stop the dust, dirt and debris getting into the cabin at the moment. But where the panel is stamped and then folded flat, these faces are getting quite corroded on this car. So it would take a long time to cause any big issue, but that's probably about the worst corrosion on the car, I reckon. There's quite a decent patch of corrosion there. So that all needs attended to, and that also makes it tricky because we're going to need to be going or working very close to the inside of the car. There's an opening here where we want to limit the amount of dust and dirt and things that get into the cabin, so that'll take a little bit of thinking, raising this up and taping off all the edges inside the car so we can get tools on top of it, because there's corrosion on top of this section as well, and we want to make sure that we get it all dealt with. That is an interesting weld. Pretty poor, that weld there, but it's not corroded because of that, but just quite interesting. So we're going to get to work, use some wire wheel equipment next and start taking out the heavy corrosion that we can see, and then working out about all the very small little tiny bits of corrosion underneath the E-coat. So I've now moved into the right rear wheel arch, and although it looks really clean and tidy, there are some minute corrosion problems, mainly coming from spot welds, it seems, in the wheel arch area. Haven't yet found any corrosion loosely like we did underneath, mainly because all this is covered with a wheel arch liner. But for instance, here underneath this seam sealer there's a spot weld which is corroded, which is half covered by seam sealer, and my strike through there is showing the corrosion coming through. That obviously needs taken care of. Same with the top mount area. We don't want to coat or put any paint on top of this area because we've got corrosion on the top mount spot welds, and also a little bit around the top mount is quite pickled underneath the E-coat, so that needs to be dealt with. A couple of spot welds that are underneath seam sealer showing little bits of corrosion which need taken off. This side isn't so bad, they're in the right rear side. The left rear side there was a lot more spot welds down this side that were showing movement, so I've had to take quite a lot of seam sealer off on the left rear wheel arch. And then also we've got to deal with this tube corrosion as well, which will be coming up next. I've now finished the corrosion removal process, so this is the use of the wire wheel tools to get rid of all the loose corrosion. This was quite a task in the end. What I thought earlier on, like I say, was going to be some basic corrosion removal work up on the back of the chassis leg up there and a couple of bits around the front subframe mounting points, was actually quite involved in the end, because like you saw in the video earlier, how much corrosion we had underneath the E-coat. which was shown in those speckles that we saw when we zoomed in. And all those speckles are now presenting themselves in circles. So when you use a wire wheel machine, depending on how big the brush tool is, what it will do is take paint off in lines or scratches, which is what those lines are there. That's bare metal where we've gone through the e-coat. All the circles are corrosion that we've basically knocked through with the tool. So there's no tools that can make that circle mark, that is pure corrosion, but very, very fine early stages of corrosion, even just here as well. And surprising amount on spot welds, lots in that spot weld on the left rear wheel arch liner up here. This is where the spot welds flex. There's no breakages at all or problems, but there was just very light corrosion on the spot welds up there in the left rear wheel arch. Underneath the car, it seemed to be that there was corrosion on the flat panels, even in the middle of a panel where there was no flex or spot weld connections or movement. There was just corrosion because all this area is open to atmosphere because there's no seam sealer on it and no under trays covering it. Although up in the seat panel area where the fuel tank lives, there was very little. That's probably because it's behind this section here, so a lot of the dirt is going underneath the fuel tank and never actually getting up onto the top of it. But whereas in the wheel arch line area, there really isn't much at all. On the flat surfaces here, there was almost zero corrosion spots, unlike underneath the car. And that's probably because there was a big plastic wheel arch liner or felt wheel arch liner in there. So those liners do a good amount of protection. And the areas that are unprotected, unfortunately the inaccessible ones, unless you take all the rear running gear off like we've done here, those are the areas that are suffering on these cars and probably will suffer a little bit more. Certainly nothing serious to worry about at the moment. If people are wondering where they need to look for corrosion, that was the biggest cause of corrosion concern on this car, was the rear left chassis leg and the area where the boot floor tray bolts into the boot floor. That chassis leg there as well, and a little bit here. Very little elsewhere, but we've gone through it with a fine tooth comb and also removed seam sealer on areas where we were seeing spot welds that were flexing and having corrosion. We actually took the seam sealer off of all these joints, so this is a seamed edge where it's spot welded to another part, and normally it has a seam sealed joint, which is what this seam sealer is, but in certain areas we could see that it was corroded underneath it and we had to take it off. Not everywhere, we've proved that fact by those areas where we've taken seam sealer off and there are no concerns underneath, but in some areas we had to expose corrosion. Like up here, this seam had to be opened up because that one was corroding. You can just see the dark shadow around the side of it, so therefore then I took that one off, which was a small amount of corrosion, took that one off and there was no corrosion around it. So you can't win them all, but we certainly have tried our absolute best to get everything removed. It's nearly bare metal, it's not quite because you can still see e-coat colour, but it's you could try and classify it as a near attempt at bare metal in the underside, but mainly just to remove the corrosion spots and things like that. I forgot to put the torch, let's see if we can get the torch on. The torch isn't working, but that's the corrosion that we found. Well, it's now removed, but you can still see it's pitted in the metal just up here by the spot weld there and another spot weld there. I don't know if you can see, yeah, you might be able to see a little bit in there where we've used wire wheel tools to go all the way through, and then also a belt sander to get rid of the heavy corrosion, and we've got rid of it as far as we can, and also taken care of it on the outside because there was some corrosion starting to creep around this side here, so we've made sure that's dealt with as well. That line there is how deep I could get the wire wheel tool on the drill, so nearly all of it, definitely past this line here, but there's about just over an inch of it which we can't get to, but luckily that inch isn't corroded, so we're quite good there. Also corrosion down here on the lower sill section as well, and some spot welds of flexing. On the sort of seat panel area just here, where one of the push rods connects in, that's the fuel tank strap bracket. And here, there's some corrosion here where the fuel tank clip point goes on, so that one was dealt with as well. You can tell corrosion because you've got what looks like a cloud, a really dark, deep blue looking cloud, and that is the corrosion that was underneath the e-coat attacking these areas. So there's a big there, and all these really dark patches are the corrosion patches here, where it goes up around the spot weld. And they normally start from flexible points, but not all of them. There were some that were just in the middle of panels randomly, like that one there for instance, that one there, that one there. You just can't ever make an absolute pattern, but we've done what we can and we're quite happy with the progress. It's actually turned out to be a very large job compared to what we initially thought, but that is the complete underside of an E92 M3 2011, stripped, fully degreased, and back to bare metal in the majority of places with seam sealer removal. So next we're going to move on to the protection, or the treatment of the corroded areas and this bare metal, and we have to do this obviously quick. This has happened all within, well, we want the bare metal exposed for as little time as possible. I think so far it's about 6 hours I've spent with the wire wheel tool to get this to this stage after the degreasing process. We're about 6 hours in this morning and rolling into this afternoon to get it back to bare metal area. And now we're going to treat it with Pore 15 metal prep for 30 minutes to wet it down and neutralise that corrosion, and it will also coat it with a zinc phosphate coat, which will be great for the next layer, which is going to be the etch primer. And there's one of the sections of sweeping of the floors that I've done just to show how much seam sealer and underseal there was that come off this car. Although we didn't intend to take seam sealer off, and we want to leave as much on there as possible, that's just how much we've had to take off just to get to the corrosion underneath it. Here I am treating the inside of the right rear wheel arch with the Pore 15 metal prep. So it might feel completely alien to be coating bare metal with a liquid, but this is Pore 15 metal prep designed to do this. Neutralise the corrosion and leave a zinc phosphate coat on the metal once it's washed off after 30 minutes. So importantly, here's the hole or the tube here. And we've obviously chosen a paintbrush that we can get all the way from the inside through all edges to make sure that any corrosion or in the peaks and troughs of the metal grain is attended to and treated. All the Pore 15 metal prep work is now finished. That was applied and kept wet for 30 minutes and then washed off with a very warm, damp cloth, microfiber cloth. So it doesn't look much different, but some of the corrosion areas have gone a bit darker, which is where the corrosion has been neutralised, and it's also coated the entire area with a zinc phosphate coat, which is going to be great for the next stage, which is high build primer. So we have to wash that off with warm water, and then we want to make sure everything's dry. So we've left the infrared heat lamp under there for about an hour now, and that's just making sure that not only the surface areas are dry, but also the cavities, which some water might have entered, only very small amounts, are also drying out nicely, so there's no chance of trapping anything. We've got every single grommet removed anyway, so everything is, we've got great chance to vent, and we've got air blowers going through there with compressed air to keep things moving. And then I'm just moving the drying lamp around different areas, making sure that every area gets warm and dry, and then we'll be moving on to the next stage, which will be etch primer. So I've also masked the outside of the car. I've put a clear car cover on there, and also masked the perimeters, the areas that I won't be painting. So I'm going to lose the line behind the wheel arch plastic trim on both sides at the rear, because the plastic wheel arch liner doesn't go all the way to the edge of the lip. So I'm going to hide the line behind, so it'll be OEM original paint for the inch which is on show after the wheel arch finishes, the trim panel that is. And then all the holes and grommets areas that we've taken out that have got access into the cabin, we've sealed up, done some double taping and checking inside the cabin to make sure that that cardboard is well, dust tight inside. Masked up the side seals, and just need to put a bag over and mask the fuel tank covers. There's the right hand side covered, and again all connected to the car's bag, all protected around the rear, so we can get right into the areas of concern that we've treated. Now we're ready to carry out the etch prime process. That's the first coat of etch primer applied. That's just a light coat first of all. That's just drying now. It's pretty much dry actually, but we've got the infrared lamps here, and we'll put them on just to make sure that everything's completely dry. And then once that is, then we can go on to the second stage of protection, which is high build primer. So now the high build primer is finished drying, and moved on to the seam sealer. And then first of all, I'm doing a brush on seam sealer because I've taken seam sealer away from all the areas that you can see in the video we talked about earlier on. Some seam sealer has still stayed, like up on panel joints there, but where I've taken it off, I'm going to replace it before I do a sprayable seam sealer, and that means so you've got brush strokes here which show that I've managed to fill the gap, so there's no chance of any moisture or water penetrating in those panel gaps. For instance, there's one I haven't done yet, and although it's still got original seam sealer right on the very edge, we still want to make sure that we've got our seam sealer all around the panel joints, using a brush to make brush strokes. And then once that's completely sealed up, which I'm just working towards the back of the car now and into the wheel arches next, then I can go forward and do a sprayable seam sealer, a very light sprayable seam sealer over the rest of the car. And this car didn't have any seam sealer under it at all, but we're going to add a little bit of protection just to keep the atmosphere away from the flat panels, which were suffering with very small surface corrosion earlier on in the video. So we're going to be doing a very, very light, thin sprayable seam sealer after we finish doing all the brushable seam sealer. Here's the underside now. The sprayable seam sealer has dried overnight. We've come in the next day, allowed it to cure fully over a good 12-hour period. And now we're looking at it from directly underneath the car. Really pleased with the finish. It's come out very flat, very smooth. Just what we wanted. We wanted something really thin, but with a very slight texture on it. We don't want a thick, fat seam sealer like they used to apply on the E46, because this car, E92, doesn't have any seam sealer. So we just wanted some extra protection, but nothing too big. So you can still see the threads here of the factory studs. Still see how thick it is when compared to the sheet panel, and all the contours and the pressings of the seat panel there, and the brake pipe bracket. These are about 1 to 1.2 mil thick, so you can still see perfectly the edge of the panel. Here's the left front mounting point, subframe mount point, where we did have this corrosion all around this area here, and the push rod connections, which don't have much seam sealer on them at all. Underneath this section there's a water drain at the bottom in there. Spring perched, wasn't really suffering with much corrosion up there. A little bit here on the left rear mounting point for the rear axle and the subframe area on those spot welds across there. Rear exhaust hangers, small amount of corrosion around this area here where that peculiar weld was, and then also we had corrosion around the boot floor corner and on the back of the chassis leg in this section here. So not only is it totally smooth and flat, but completely dry. This is fairly high-end work, because you don't see many places that deal with a painted finish like this underneath the car, this smooth with a semi-satin finish, but also a system that is completely dry to touch, so you can work on it, because we find there's nothing worse than the things like wax oil and Schultz that stay a little bit sticky and that they get sprayed over everything, and then you come to work on the car in years to come and your hands are covered in that nasty sticky black wax. We like to do completely dry systems, so that's what we've done here. And then we had corrosion around the boot floor section here. We've done all the rear lips as well, where they fold around 2 mil drop down there, and then also like the 10 mil drop down on this section of the pressing of the chassis. Kept the original seam sealer in place where we didn't have any issues with it over the panel gaps, and then when we did have issues with it, like here we talked about earlier, we took some off to get the corrosion off of those spot welds, and that's now been recoated. There's the right rear chassis mount point for the rear subframe. Here's the battery box area. Very good, that's come up nice. Don't see any problems with that. And then centre of the floor, in the middle of the rear axle carrier panel, where one of the modules lives up there, inside the car that is. We did have some corrosion around that area up there, which we've taken out. As you can see, I've gone into the seam sealer until I found clean metal, and then the treatment process through all those steps you've just watched. And now the sprayable. I have actually thinned this down, this seam sealer, which is why it's come out so thin, but very durable, can rub pretty hard, you don't make any marks, nothing comes off at all, Really happy with this. And as you saw in the video just now, you can see very slight brush strokes here, which I did over the panel edges that we'd taken off seam sealer. Granted, it's not as fat as the original BMW seam sealer. However, that was all done with robots, programmed robots, where no brushes have to come into contact. It's purely sprayed only, and then they can just walk away from it and no human has to interact with it. Whereas obviously we're not robots here. We have to deal with it, and therefore our thinner section is thinned out when we put a brush stroke down it. But I'm very happy that it's completely sealed the panel joints and there's no water or atmosphere going to penetrate through those. That's on the areas that we've taken the corrosion away from when we've had to take the seam sealer off. Exactly the same on this side. Seam sealed with a brush stroke first, and then we've done later on, about an hour later, then done the complete underside sprayable seam sealer, which is in our version of an E-coat. We mainly use this on E46s, but it goes quite well on all BMWs. We find actually nearly all cars. Most people use this type of peculiar grey, green, olive, beige colour. It's like a weird mix, and it's the closest sort of one we've found to BMW's E-coat colour, so it goes well with nearly all cars. Then here's the right rear wheel arch. There was corrosion suffering around that strut top mounting point there, and we also had corrosion in this pass-through tube for the fuel tank breathing system. So it's been sealed all the way around, and it's also been sprayed as far as we could get without creating any clumps. To get a spray in there without building it up around the outside, you have to have the nozzle very close. But as you have the nozzle close, if you hold it there for much longer than half a second or even less than that, you're going to get a build up in there, and the build up will snag when you put the convoluted hose in. So it has to be a really fine spray so that it doesn't get snagged or come off when the tube goes back through. So it's coated as best as we think we can get it. Push rod there, where the push rod connection goes into. Lower seal edge, there was corrosion creeping through on these edges up here. That's been taken care of, and a little bit around the back side of that tube where it comes into the seat panel and fuel tank area. So all this has been coated and prepared, well, protected should I say. And I just love how you can see all the original pressings just with a still tiny amount of texture just collecting, but nothing serious and gloopy. So that makes it stronger, in fact, because of the deeper, the thicker the product is, the more flex it would have if you moved it or washed it or rubbed it, and then the more chance it's got of breaking off. But a thin section like that is excellent. There's a bit more of a higher spray there where I must have gone over that area twice. That gives you an idea of a ripple, more textured finish that we could apply if we need to, but we've got a much more thinner coat, even so much so you can still see the stamping numbers in that panel there on the seat panel. And then down onto the very bottom of the seat panel section, near where it meets the floor, there was small amounts of corrosion just starting on these spot welds just here, and a little bit around the fuel tank's strap bracket in there. So then we've just done a gentle blend underneath the car where it starts then doing the horizontal section towards the front. But all this is covered with a felt panel anyway. It comes up to about here, about an inch past the end of that floor section. So the join lines are going to be pretty well hidden. Front join line is going to be hidden by that felt tray that we just talked about. Rear join line is hidden right at the rear panel, so behind the bumper and the boot floor tray. And the side on the rear wheel arches, like I mentioned earlier, the wheel arch panels on these don't go right to the lips. They are over an inch gap, so we're going to hide the paint line behind the wheel arch panel, which is why we haven't painted all the way to the white arch. Plus, when you get close to an outside painted surface, that's then very tricky to blend in and mask. Not too bad on E46s because you've got a thick lip which you can prepare to, but on an E92 it's pressed absolutely flat, so it's extremely hard to put a join line in there. And that's why we blend the lines. We will blend the lines up in the behind the wheel arch liner. We've blocked off the alarm section up there with the wiring loom, and also the fuel tank filling neck system up there with also another wiring loom. Make sure nothing goes up there. And then lastly, here was some corrosion up on this panel up here where the push rod connects to. there was just corrosion coming from those spot welds, and also randomly all dotted around this place. And now we've got a super smooth environment, which is going to be really good and protect it for years to come. Also corrosion down that lower section down there, which has been dealt with. A little bit on this lower edge near the fuel tank strap bracket, and across this section on the left hand side of the seat panel area. And that completes it. So whilst we've got all of the grommets out, every single grommet is open, we've got brilliant access into all the cavities, so we might as well do some top up cavity waxing. It would be a shame not to whilst we've got great access with the axle out, fuel tank out, and every grommet out. And then once we're done, I'll put the grommets back in, and then we can start the rebuild process. That's the cavity wax process applied. You can see it dripping out the right rear grommet hole for the rear axle carrier panel. So plenty of holes on this chassis to get into. So we use our 1/2 meter injection wands, and then we go from example this side, and we can get to probably about that stud there, I'd suppose, and then drag back, and then start from that side, get to that stud and overlap. So we'll always get into the middle. There's not really an area that we can't reach, I don't think, on these cars. Plenty of holes. Look, one there, that goes straight up to that. It's all open cavity, so we can get pretty much everywhere, and that's what I've done. Probably more cavity wax than the factory put in. You don't really see a great amount when you look inside previous to my installation, so quite happy that I've never put anything through there either. I've always gone through that one, and we're getting leaks out of the other holes, so quite happy. I did that one first, and I then got a leak out of that one, so I know that things are and spread around quite well. Then going into the left front corner, I was doing in there, and it was coming out that gap up there. So yeah, it's getting well protected. Also did in there, and we started getting out of the flutes down on the other side of that tape on the outside of the seal. Did the complete section here. Obviously this is messy, I'm going to wipe all this off whilst it's still wet, but going in at this entry hole here, putting the wand all the way to the back, and then dragging backwards as I'm spraying, and I can get all of that in one go. Then separately did the fuel tank strap bracket. Then moving over to the right hand side, did the entire tube. I decided to do the tube because it's hard to guarantee how much seam sealer was in there, and we know that these are a weak point for corrosion, probably because the convoluted tube must flex or move and rub paint over the years, and possibly because BMW don't put any seam sealer in there at all, so it's just bare e-coat, and with that tube rubbing during installation process, or even generally whilst the tank moves about whilst driving, that obviously is a weak point. So we've waxed that area as well completely. Started at this side and then dragged the wand back while spraying, which is why we've got a lot of dribble, but I'll clear all that up. Did the push rods as well, because they've got a section where it drains out from at the bottom, plus that hole, that strengthening plate there. Into these grommets in the seal section, and then into the right rear wheel arch as well. So very happy with that. Just going to let that finish drying, drip in, and then wipe off the excess. And if you're interested, there's 24 grommets that we've taken out of the rear section of this chassis. 12 of the 20 mils, 8 of the 25s, 2 of the 15s, and 2 of the 12s. So before the install, I'm just starting to clean some of the plastics. I've cleaned the fuel tank, carbon canister, some other pieces as well. I've gone over it with, protected it with Aerospace 303 as well, even though you won't see this top side. It is really nice and smooth, completely bone dry, and almost back to original finish. Here's some of the new BMW parts. There's not a great amount needed on this car, so it's still so fairly new original car. There's a fuel mounting clip there because that clip didn't survive the removal process, that little Christmas tree plunger, and there's never any chance we want to put anything back loose or broken, so when it comes to clips and things like that, we'll always make sure everything goes back original. And then some heat shield fixings, because some of those are corroded, they're just there, not protected. Lots of new under tray fixings with the large washers, because again they're corroded. I think those are heat shield washer bolts. Some plastic rivets there, or plastic studs, and then some speed clips. And we also did take the liberty of ordering new heat shields for the rear exhaust silencer. Seems good time to do those. They're not much money, they're still available from BMW, and also whilst we've got the exhaust down, there's no labour, it's just nice fresh ones, because I think we mentioned in the video earlier on there were certain areas where they'd already corroded through and they had to have large washers, rusty washers on there, which doesn't look that nice, so we're going to go with new ones. So start putting the components in for the fuel tank system, also the battery leads gone on. So every bit of plastic's been cleaned first of all, and then also protected with Aerospace 303. So the fuel tank's looking great, even though it's hidden, looking very good. Brake pipes I cleaned off fully, front to back, and also the fuel vent pipe that goes all the way to the carbon canister. Carbon canister and the bracket have been cleaned, so is the intake pipe up in the left rear wheel arch, and also the small one to the fuel tank. Also the filler neck and the filler neck tube have been cleaned, and also the one that comes out of that holder up there. Battery cable and all the brackets have also been cleaned, so is the handbrake cable carrier. So everything's been torque checked and paint marked as we go. So 25 Newton meters for the M8 fuel tank bolts there, 10 for the M6 handbrake carrier system there, even if you've done a Jubilee clip. So our paint colour today is going to be yellow. Fuel filler neck system up there as well, vent hose, and even the small little brackets are being cleaned as they're gone, and also the loom, cleaning those and protecting them with Aerospace 303. That's why these are coming out really nice, looking new. They're all original components, but like I say, looking good. Cleaning them, and also the alarm box I cleaned before I put that in. So brake pipes look excellent, perfect original condition. Amazingly they came undone as well, which is good, because a lot of E92s suffer with the joints here and over here where they go onto the rear axle. They're commonly seizing and breaking the hoses or twisting the hoses, because this is a black plastic coat and the water gets underneath, swells the coat in, so it grabs the union and then the union doesn't spin. But these two did come undone. I still need to clean the ends of the union and put these spring clips on there once I get round to that stage later on. But they're so good, they'll be perfectly fine to reuse. So well, they almost look like brand new, you can even see the writing. So we'll be waxing those, making sure that they're fully protected for many years to come. So we're also going to take this opportunity to change the braided hoses that connect the front to rear hard lines to the rear axle hard lines. These are notoriously hard work to get to because the axle is in the way, so because we've got the axle out, we've got a great chance to change these for no additional labour, just the price of some hoses. So Hell braided hoses is going to replace the OEM original rubber hoses. So here's the underside with the really nice heat shields on, nice and bright. Really pleased we've got those, not only because they're more stable because they haven't corroded around the bolt holes, but they just freshen up the underside, since this is such a big area that they cover right at the back of the car. So rear exhaust silencer heat shields installed, and also I've routed the cable in for the nitrons. So this car's got nitrons, I think it's R3s, and when it came in, these were already pre-routed and they're fit before the axle goes in, because these cables for the remote reservoirs sit above the axle, then they go through the plastic boot floor tray and into the boot, and that's where the canisters are accessed. And taking pictures of the pre-installation and then looking at them, we could see that this side was clipped in. They already had cable ties holding themselves to the back of the shocks, and then they were clipped in into that factory clipping point there. Remember, we had some corrosion around that one, and then sat behind the battery plastic tray, and then they just bypassed a stud here and went into the boot. This side there was a couple of cable ties as well. I'm not the biggest fan of using cable ties on cars, because it just sort of highlights an aftermarket installation normally, because BMW don't use any cable ties anywhere. They've got great clipping points and random little bits of plastic that just all help hold things together. So when it went past these two studs, which are in the back of the rear axle carrier panel, it was just bypassing them and not doing anything, not connected to them in any way. And if you remember, we had corrosion around those two mounting studs there. So using a bit of knowledge and looking on the BMW parts catalogue, I found some screw-in threaded plastic holders which have screwed onto the chassis on those factory stud points there and there, and the perfect size to clip in the nitron reservoir tubes, so, or the hoses. So extremely tight now, so much so that this side doesn't rely on any cable ties whatsoever, although you can see obviously the factory wouldn't have put it like that if BMW designed it, but that is the way it was routed prior to it coming in. And you've still got a nice amount of flex. It's not touching the chassis in any way, but you've got a good amount of flex. if the shock does move. And this side we have to use 2 cable ties, that is how it was originally, but that means that it's not now supporting its load through this very lightweight plastic fuel vapor tube. It's now got a clip-in point onto the chassis, so I'm really pleased that that's come out. A little bit of extra thought and care and attention to detail, which makes the job a lot better in the long run. There's the 2 new braided hell hoses. These are the middle 2 that come off the back of the front to rear metal lines and connect in a little U shape to the rear axle hard lines once the axle's installed. You can get to this joint up at this end, but it's nearly impossible to get this joint nicely and easily because the axle beam is almost covering it. It's a real pain to get to. So always put them on first. And we've got a pair of new hell braided hoses with floating ends to replace the factory original BMW ones. Here's our jig that we've made for the rear axle. It's not painted yet, not finished either, but it's good enough and we're happy with it. It's done safe loading and unloading of this E92 axle. Without any bolt systems, it just rests on some factory holes, which probably are how BMW carry it or transport it at the factory, I'd imagine. All connected to a frame which is on a hydraulic transmission jack, so we can raise the axle no problem at all into the car and then lower it if we need to. This axle's already been powder coated by somebody else, I'm not sure when, but it's holding up really well, so we've given it a quick clean up and that is ready for installation into the car. So whilst working on the car, we noticed that the diff input pinion seal had been leaking because there's a good old historic collection of oil under here and a moisture wet patch from the input pinion. So we'll be changing that pinion seal because they're only £35 from BMW. So we've marked the nut in relation to the pinion gear with a centre punch and also 2 paint marks as a backup. And this one's quite tight, so I'm using a 3-legged puller to pull the flange off, and that one's coming off nicely now, and then we can remove the seal and install it with the genuine BMW new tool. There's the input flange off, and you can even see the dribble of oil that's been coming out past that seal. Here's the new seal from BMW, plus the lock ring and the genuine BMW installation tool. That's the diff front input pinion seal now replaced with a new lock ring, and also the diff oil leak cleaned up. It's only a minor leak, but dealt with it at the same time. Obviously the diff is starting to corrode a little bit underneath the black paint, so that could do with touching up, or even a diff refresh at some stage, maybe if some of the other components are being done at a later point, maybe the arms or some diff bushes and things like that. So almost coming to the end of this rebuild. Got the prop shaft heat shields on through the middle and the centre section felt covers underneath the floor pans. Just need to connect the rear shock absorbers to the lower wishbones and also put the aquaplane guards on, which go over here at the rear of the seals to direct the water away from the rear tyres. Then it'd be the exhaust system in full, goes on from the front to the back. Here's a look at the new Hell braided brake lines. They've been fitted, aligned, so they're not touching anything. They're still nice and flexible. We've marked them to show that they're all fitted correctly. Handbrake cables are now fitted. Still need to put the brake discs on as well, because that's how we have to get the handbrake cables out, and then obviously that means putting the caliper back on and tightening the handbrake, the caliper mounting points. Diff fluid was also a tiny little bit low, only a little bit, probably from that leak on the front seal, so top that up with genuine BMW fluid and put the plug back in. So yeah, it's just rear brake discs, aquaplane guards, exhaust system and rear shock absorber connections next. Now this stage is a little bit over the top, but just thought we'd try out some of this G-Technic C4 permanent trim restorer for the wheel arch liners, because they're quite sort of pummeled with just debris. I'll see if I can zoom in on a little bit here. Just how much sort of damage has occurred just from stones, and yeah, stone rash you'd call that, I suppose. This has already been washed quite extensively, although it looks quite dirty. Here's one that I'm part way through applying, and here's one that I've left and then buffed off. So they do come up quite well. Seems to fill gaps, even though I don't think it's designed for that. It's obviously designed for very smooth plastic, but what a difference. There's one wheel arch liner to the other one there. So not only are these restoring the trims, but they're also coating it with an excellent resistance to water and dirt and things like that, and that will just splash off in the future. So the exhaust system's about to go on, and we've just noticed that there is a broken rubber on the back section here, so we'll need to replace that, and that one's looking a little bit broken on this internal side just up here. So we'll get a second rubber, so 2 rubbers from BMW. We'll also get some earth straps for the rear. This one's got an aftermarket one made up, and this one was in 2 pieces when we came to the car. So get them sorted as well. And then also, customers taking the opportunity to replace all 4 lambda probes with genuine BMW ones. I don't know if there were any problems, just a customer request whilst the exhaust was down. So we'll do the before cat and after cat lambda sensors, and there they are in their genuine BMW boxes. There's the 4 genuine BMW lambda probes. So we've got bank 1, bank 2, pre-cat and post-cat, all in there, torqued and paint marked. Here's some of the new parts from BMW for the exhaust rubber mounts. We noticed one of the other ones was poor, so we decided rather than 3 we'll just get 4 instead, all new. There's the earth straps for the rear exhaust silencer mounts, some expanding rivets for the aquaplane guards, and these are the 2 grommets that hold part of the little wire clips that hold the handbrake cable to the rear subframe. They were missing when the car came in, they were cable tied to the subframe. We're going to make sure that it all goes back originally as it came from the factory. So these are the grommets that sit in the subframe or on the wire, and we're waiting for the little wire hooks. They're coming from BMW Germany, so they're not in this picture, but they will be fitted to hold the handbrake cables when they come in. Here's the new rubber mounts that we've put on the rear exhaust silencer, the centre section, 2 new BMW rubber ones. Also the earth straps for the left hand side and the right hand side. Centre exhaust rubbers, we've replaced those as well, and put some new nuts on the diff carrier mount hanging brackets. And also down here now you'll be able to see the new lambda probes. This is bank 2, pre-cat and post-cat, and here's bank 1, pre-cat and post-cat. So now it's time to bleed the brake system. We've had the rear axle apart, so we've obviously had to disconnect the brake lines, which meant we lost some brake fluid, and we've obviously changed those middle rear brake lines to flexible ones. So we're going to be going with the customer's requested brake fluid, which was Performance Friction RH665. Here we are bleeding the brakes on the near side rear now, and that noise you can hear is the pump going. We're pulsing the ABS as well as bleeding it normally. We're also running the brake bleed program through BMW ISTA. The work is finished under this E92 M3 now. So we've just carried out a brake fluid bleed, as you saw on the video, with the Performance Friction RH665, and bled through all 4 AP brake calipers, inboards and outboard bleed nipples, and also did a forced ABS pump bleed via BMW ISTA, running the brake bleed program. That was because obviously we had the rear axle out, and like I say, we disconnected this brake union joint up here and also changed the brake lines there. And although we capped them off whilst we're working on them, there is an amount of brake fluid that you lose during the process, so that was carried out. So we had 2 litres of brake fluid go through, so not only does that flush the system and completely change it, it guarantees that we've got no risk of air bubbles in there anymore whatsoever. I've left the wheels off for the moment just so to show the wheel arches, how bright and clean and fresh they are, along with the wheel arch liners, which as we saw earlier on we coated with that G-Technic coat. So we've got a really nice, very light, thin coat of the sprayable seam sealer of the axle. Here are some areas that were heavily corroded, well not heavily corroded, but corroded previously before we started the work. I really like how thin this is. So you still see the BMW factory finish sealer there, and then this is our version up here, nice and thin. I've also coated the metal brake pipes with transparent wax, which is why there's a sticky wax substance over here, and I've also done some up over on those areas up there because they're quite common to corrode, and also a bit on heat shield fixings where there's a metal connection to our seam sealer, so that there's less chance of it giving any sort of corrosion in the future. Also cleaned the subframe up. So this subframe had already been powder coated previously by the customer or somewhere else, and it's still holding up really nicely. It's like a gloss black finish. It was dusty, but it's cleaned up really well, and that now gives a great contrast against the sprayable seam sealer underneath the car, which is that eco sort of version, and also the bright exhaust box silencer heat shields. Got new nuts up on there and the earth straps, new rubber mounts at the back, the hell braided hoses up here and new spring clips, new rubber mounts here for the exhaust, a diff input pinion seal, and then we've tried to renew nearly every fixing as we've gone along, anything that we've worked on. So new BMW heat shield clips, and up there grommets were good enough to reuse. Underneath the car we've got all new panelling clips because these get corroded quite badly, so we've got the plastic 10mm headed ones plus the 8mm self-tapping screws. Aquaplane guards are all on with new rivets up in there, and if you peer inside you can see that there's now no longer any corrosion on that bottom edge, and there would have been no way to get to that with keeping components on, and with the fuel tank still in there we'd have had no chance. So cleaned the bottom of the fuel tank as well, but as you can see we've gone to the lower edge of the rear central panels, and then the join line where we finished is underneath here. So when you look under the car you can't really tell where the work has happened, but you can see it's been done to a high standard because you can't see any join lines. Try and just get you in up there. You can see the spot welds are nice and visible now, no corrosion on them. Every single fixing that we've worked on has either been torqued or paint marked with a yellow pen, so we're extremely happy that everything is back together to correct specification, and also sanity checking that we know that that shocker bolt is done, that subframe bolt is done, that earth strap is done, and every single fixing that we've worked on will have a yellow paint mark to remind us that that has been dealt with, and we don't need to worry about checking it again or thinking, did we do that? No, we've done it. The handbrake cable carrier clips came in from BMW Germany, so there's a little grommet that goes in the subframe first up there, and then the metal clip which suspends the cable to stop it landing on the exhaust heat shield. When the car came in they were cable tied. Probably the grommets were lost when the subframe was powder coated, and we don't really want to use cable ties if we can help it, so we put the BMW correct clips up there to hold them. And looking around onto the right hand side, so what you're seeing in the distance is some of the cavity wax. So I have cavity waxed structural point over there. You see some of the cavity wax coming out. That's not dirt. All the corrosion taken care of up there behind the battery cable holder. There's just no way you'd be able to get to that without taking it all off. I can barely get the camera in there, let alone any sort of tooling. And now you can rest assured that all the seam sealer edges are protected against water ingress, and also that channel where the fuel vent sits in behind here has all been dealt with and taken care of. Looking really nice and fresh in the wheel arch, and it'll be very easy to clean for future years to come. And even the hidden areas are really well protected. And nicely finished with BMW grommets as best as possible. So that gives you an idea of how we tackle the surface corrosion on the BMW E92 M3s. We could go further if customers wanted. We could always be changing spring arms, tie arms,
complete on this 2011 E92 M3 in mineral white now. We've carried out an 18-mile road test on varying roads. I'm very happy with how the car performs, and it's now ready to hand over to the customer. I think they're going to get a wheel alignment done next to their own specifications, just to make sure everything is completely true now the rear axle's been removed and reinstalled again. If it helps people considering this sort of work, give you an idea of labour times, what we've spent on this car is about 32 labour hours we've spent so far on the rear end restoration work that you've been watching. So if that's of interest to anybody, and you'd like to talk to us about any sort of corrosion treatment works on the E92 M3, or even a little underside restorations or suspension refresh, that sort of thing, then please let us know. Get in touch with Redish and we'll be happy to help you.